Kicklighter, and this is my video project for Coach Blount's 9 weeks project. So I'm going to be interviewing my grandfather, Robert A. Rice, and he's going to tell me some things about the Korean War, what he experienced. The first question is, could you please briefly tell me about where you were born and where you're from, where you were raised?
Well, I was born in a small town in south central Georgia called Adel, about 24 miles north of Valdosta.
And what year were you born in?
Pardon?
What year were you born?
1927. That's a long time ago, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it is. When you were a child, did you ever think that you would go off to war?
Never.
When
I was a child, there was no wars or rumors of wars.
Yes, sir.
The World War II brewed for about 8 years before it ever happened, and it was brewing when I was a kid.
When you were in high school, did you ever have any older friends or family members that were involved in wars?
I had a lot of older members, and I had a lot of members of my class. In 1946, it's when I finished school, but in 1945, a lot of them, when they were a junior in high school, quit and joined the military. They never did get their diploma, and a lot of them didn't come home.
Yes, sir. When you were drafted, or were you drafted, or did you volunteer to be in the military?
No, I didn't volunteer.
You were drafted?
I was drafted twice. In 1947, I was drafted. There was 8 of us that left Brunswick, Georgia, and went to Savannah, and was inducted into the Army. They sent us home and said we'd get a letter where to report. And the war had just ended. And I got that letter, but it wasn't to tell me where I was to report. It said, due to the ending of World War II, you're no longer needed in the armed forces of the United States. And I just hollered. That was a happy moment.
Yes, sir.
So, you see, I was drafted then. And when I got out of high school, I was going to college. And I backed out of that. In about 3 months, they drafted me again, but I didn't get out of that one.
Yes, sir. What branch did you go into when you were drafted?
I was in the Army.
How old were you when you entered the service?
About 23 years old.
Where did you go for basic training, and what was it like?
I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And it hadn't been open long because they closed it after World War II and opened it up again in the Korean War. So when I got there, actually didn't wore the same clothes I had for a week. Finally got a uniform.
Yes, sir.
And it was pretty bad. That was my basic training. But then when I finished my basic training, I went for special training. Engineer training, I went to Fort Bliss, Texas, right by myself. I'd met all my friends and left them and went out there and took, let's see, 13 weeks of construction engineer battalion. Now later on I'll tell you something else about the engineers.
Yes, sir. Could you tell me about your area of specialty in the service, and what did you do?
Well, my area of specialties was what I just told you. When I went to Fort Bliss, Texas, I specialized in engineers. That's construction engineers. That's behind the front line. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. But when I got to Korea, they put me in the combat engineers. I had never taken any combat engineer training in my life. And I told the man, and he said, well, you'll learn quick. So, that's what we did. We learned how much explosives it would take to blow up a bridge 50 feet long, so forth and so on.
So were there any times that you actually did have to blow bridges up and things like that?
No.
There
We
were.
build them.
Y'all built bridges. Was there a
We
specific...
build bridges. We build airstrips with steel matting. We defuse mines. We laid mines. That's what the engineers consider. Combat engineers.
Yes.
Construction engineers work behind the lines. They didn't go up front.
And that's what you were originally going
Pardon?
to be? You were originally going to be a construction engineer?
Construction, but I never did. I went straight into the... My outfit was called the 185th Combat Engineer Battalion, 19th Combat Group, the 3rd Army.
Yes, sir.
That was my address.
So the war had already started when you joined the service?
Yes,
That's when they drafted you?
I'd say maybe a year.
It would have been going on a year.
Maybe a year.
And how did you get to Korea? Did you fly or did you go by sea?
I went on a troop ship. Left Camp Stoneman, which was Oakland, California. I went over this time of year, right now. Took anywhere from 11 to 13 days, I don't remember, and I ate Thanksgiving dinner on the ship.
So was it close quarters? What was some of your experiences on the way over there?
Have what?
On the way over there, what was it like? Was it...
Well, that was like I've never been on a ship going overseas before. It was scary, especially with waves 20 to 25 feet high. Off the coast of Hawaii, we had a sister ship following us. That we had 5,200 and something men on my boat, and the sister ship was a USS Blount. It was probably half a mile behind us. We got in these 25-foot seas, and it broke in two. All the rivets popped. They had to take that ship into Hawaii, which was 20 miles off the coast there. But we went on. They had to, I don't know whatever happened to it.
What was the first thing that you remember when you stepped onto the foreign ground in Korea?
Jumping in, wanting to swim back home.
So you didn't...
Well, that's the first time I've really ever been scared in my life. As we got off of my ship, there was a hospital ship right by it, and they were bringing, oh man, they were bringing wounded on and caskets for the dead. And if you don't think that'll scare you, it's terrible, really.
Yes, sir. What was the weather, all-around weather like in Korea?
Well, the summers were very hot, but the winters was antagonizing. Anywhere from 30 to 45 below zero. Snow, you just can't believe it. And I spent almost two miserable winters over there. I stayed over there. I was supposed to have gotten home in 9 months, but I had to stay 13 months because they couldn't get replacements for the type of work I did, combat engineers.
Yes, sir. You just told me how miserably cold it was in the winter times. Is there any personal stories that you have from the cold?
Well, yes, there is. The Chinese, the North Koreans, we pushed them back all the way to China. And when we did, the Chinese brought their troops in. They had 3 times as many troops than the North Koreans. And it was so cold that a lot of the Chinese died from the weather, froze to death because they didn't have adequate clothing like we did. I've been out in the field on the edge of mountains and see 8 or 10 bodies, not a bullet hole in them. They froze to death. Now, I don't know our boys. We had clothing. We had what called a pile jacket. You put it on, zip it up, then you put an Arctic coat on over that, and it'd keep you warm. We had insulated combat boots, keep you warm. The Chinese and North Koreans wore tennis shoes and wrapped their legs in cloth to try to keep warm. Now, we did have a problem. Like if you go out on the guard duty at night and sit on a machine gun and it's 30 below zero, your hands would get frostbit, and if it get to the point where they turn black, they'd have to pop it off at the knuckle. You can't save it. And a lot of boys lost their fingers, lost their toes. But it was pretty bad over there in the wintertime.
Yes, sir. How did that affect your sleeping conditions when it was cold?
How did it affect what?
Your sleeping conditions.
Well, we slept in tents, and we had goose down sleeping bags. It's supposed to keep you warm 20 below zero. But every tent was rigged up with a 55-gallon drum of diesel fuel on the outside with copper tubing running inside and dripping in a 15-gallon bucket. And we'd light that. That was our heat. And a lot of nights the heat would go off because the diesel fuel would freeze. Now that's cold weather. But we had pretty adequate heating. You put 2 gallons of antifreeze in Jeeps and weapons carriers, and it'd still freeze up. So almost every night we had to drain those things. Now that's a job. They keep them busting blocks, busting D8, D10 Caterpillar blocks, popping them into. So they had to drain them. And the Soyang River, which we was on, we stayed in this one spot for a year. The Soyang River was about a half a mile wide and 3 feet deep. And it'd freeze solid. You could drive an army tank over it. And we built the longest Bailey Bridge in Korea. I don't know if it's still there or not. But it took something like 7 months to build.
Can you tell me what a Bailey Bridge is?
Yes, a Bailey Bridge is a portable bridge. It's the tracks that the vehicle runs over is laid on pontoons all the way across the river. Now we built a regular bridge similar to this one we got out here in the big bridge, swinging cables, and we had to. They sent the first Marines the first Marines came in and had to set up machine guns around that bridge at night because they'd come in, women, North Korean women had come in with grenades under their arms and climb up on the rafters of that bridge and pull the pins, blow themselves up, blow the bridge up. It took us a long time to build it. They'd have big searchlights at night all over that bridge, and finally we evidently discouraged them, or the Marines did. And I met a boy that finished school with me. He was in the 1st Marines, and I met him over there. And it was like old times when he finished high school with me. But the Bailey Bridge was our specialty. You could set up a Bailey Bridge and there was no height to it. It just floated like a boat. And you could run tanks over it. You couldn't run caterpillars. They're too heavy. But we built 2 of those and the big bridge while I was over there. I was supposed to have gotten out in 9 months. I got back in 13. I just told you that because we couldn't have replacements. But that's about the extent of it.
Did the weather ever affect your weapons that you used?
Yes, it did.
What did it do to those?
You had to clean your weapons once a week, and you were not allowed to put any type of oil on them. And the old M1 rifle would not freeze up. You could shoot it at 30 below. But an M1 carbine would freeze up. It was semi-automatic at the time, and I was over there for 2 or 3 months. They took those away from us. That's the type like I gave Baxter. That's an M1 carbine. We had to turn them all in, and then they replaced them with M2 carbines, which is fully automatic. M1 was semi, but an M2 would empty a 15-round clip in 3 seconds. And it would freeze up. So, machine guns, they'd freeze up. So, if you keep the oil off of them.
So the M1 carbine was your primary weapon?
Well, yes. They issued me a .45 pistol, and I wore it for about 3 weeks, and I couldn't hit the inside of a barn with it. And I went to my company commander and told him, I said, I'm over here, I gotta have something to protect myself, and I just can't use this pistol. I can't shoot it. So he issued me a M1 carbine.
So you were allowed to choose what weapons you used?
Pardon?
Were you allowed to choose what weapons you basically wanted to use?
No.
Or they were standard
No,
issued?
if you were issued a weapon, if you had an excuse like I did, and several boys did, most everybody had the carbine. But if you had to use your hands a lot, you know, you'd wore your .45 pistol. And I wore the pistol and had the carbine. My company commander gave me a carbine.
About how you were an engineer and how they issued your weapons to you. Was there ever a time that you had to guard the camp?
You had to pull guard duty when it come your turn. I was walking guard duty one night, and back then I smoked a lot of cigarettes. I was walking guard duty, and I was so cold that I lit a cigarette up, which that is not to be. And I was standing up by a tree, and I heard somebody walking in the snow, and you're supposed to say, "Halt, who goes there?" in Korean. And I have forgotten it. But anyhow, I challenged the man, and it was a second lieutenant And he walked up to me and he said, "Soldier, was you smoking?" I said, "Yes, sir, I was." He said, "You know what that means on guard duty?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "It's very serious." He said, "You'll report to me in the morning." So the next morning, I talked to my captain, who was in charge of my company, and told him what happened. I said, "Captain Colors, I was just so cold I had to smoke." He said, "Don't worry about it." I never did hear anything else from him. But I was to go home in 2 weeks. They could have really stuck me. But you had to walk, you had to sit a machine gun one night, you had to walk one night, and as far as the front lines go, you got a sector of 3 miles that is the front line. And I stayed in it for 9 months in that sector. So if you were within, it's called a combat zone. If you're in that combat zone, you're pretty well on the front line, you know. Really, everywhere in Korea was the front line. There's so much infiltration. Everywhere, you were in danger everywhere you were in Korea.
Right.
Just like, did I tell you? I don't think I told you about me on the train coming up to the front line. Well, I landed in Busan, Korea. And when I got off the troop ship, I went to this separation center, and this colored sergeant was there, and he said, at the time I was a PFC, he said, "You PFC Rice?" Yeah. He said, "Well, you're attached to the 185th Combat Engineers." I said, "Sir, I've never taken combat engineer training." He said, "Well, you'll learn." And he said, "But you can't join them right now. They're trapped in the Chosin Reservoir." That was a bad place. And I had to wait there for 9 days. We got on a little old troop train going up to the front line, and it stopped. And about what I'm telling you, that every place over there is dangerous. The infiltrators had blown a bridge up about 300 yards in front of us. They trying to hit the train, but they didn't. We had to sit there for 3 or 4 days, and finally we moved up. So, but it just, you know, make a long story short, every place you were there was front line.
Was the currency there a lot different than the currency that we use here?
Oh Lord, yes. Well, let's get around to our currency. We had what they call a military scrip. They paid us off in a military scrip, which was about probably 5 inches long, 2 inches wide, little thing like that. If we got ready to come home, if we accumulated it, they paid us back in American currency, but you could send it home if you wanted to. Okay, the Korean money was called won, W-O-N. And now, this was back when our dollar was solid. You know what I mean? 8,000 won was $1. You could take $1, you could take $5 and buy a cow. Or you could buy a fruit stand, $5. So, but now, as I think, the last reports I heard, it was 1,800 won to $1. That's it.
So our money's basically lost value since then.
Ooh, yes. 360 yen Japanese was $1. I think something like, I don't know, 40 yen now. believe it's 40 yen.
So they gave you American money whenever they did give you.
When we got ready to come home, what money that they advised you when you got paid off once a month, which I made $80 a month, they advised you to send most of that money home. So I sent something like $3,000. We got, okay, let's go.
So was there a time that you when you were in Korea that you were actually you feared for your life? You were in fear that you might die?
When I stepped on the dock at Busan,
As soon as you got there, you knew?
when I first got there.
Did you ever regret going to Korea and fighting?
Well, I really didn't have any choice. As far as regrets go, yeah, I regretted going over there, but when I got over there, I had to make the best of it. I couldn't come home, so I might as well enjoy it.
Was the food that you had over there, what did they issue the same food to you over and over again, or did
You eat out the cans most of the time. They had what they call a company area that had cooks, and you'd have like instant potatoes, artificial eggs. You didn't eat much hot food at all. Only at Christmas and Thanksgiving you had turkey.
what was the war all around about?
Well, it was about the North Koreans trying to take over South Korea, the whole country. One section was communist, the other section was not. So, and they finally brought China in on it because, and Russia, communistic countries. But it was all about taking over power. That's what it was about.
So did you come home before the war was over, or did it end
Yes,
while
I
you were
did.
there?
Yes, it did.
When did you get to come home?
When?
Yes, sir.
Well, I don't quite understand what you mean when.
What date was it when?
Oh, well. I got out of the service in 1952. I was drafted for 2 years. I had enough combat points. I got out in 21 months. And I got out in 1952. I don't remember the month.
Do you remember what the first thing you did when you got home was?
Well, the first thing I did when I hit the United States, I had to go to Fort Benning, Georgia to get my discharge. I stayed there a month. And then I got on a bus. No, I got a troop train. No, I take that back. I did. I got on a bus. And I went from Fort Benning to Brunswick, Georgia. Other than marrying my wife, was the happiest day of my life.
So you were very happy to be home from Korea?
Oh, yes, yes.
Well, thank you for taking the time to do. So after you came home, did being in Korea for that time period help you make decisions in life? Because it sounds like it forced you to grow up pretty quickly over
Yes,
there.
it really did. Being in Korea really made a man out of me. It made a Christian out of me. Because when I went over there, at that time I didn't know how to thank the Lord. But when I finally found out who He was, I thanked Him for bringing me home safe. I didn't get a scratch on me. And I just thank Him for everything that happened from the time I got there from the time I got back. And another thing, when I said it made a man out of me, I was real bad about profanity. But when I got home, I knew that the Lord brought me home. And I knew He wanted me to quit cursing so much. Because anybody that uses profanity is trying to build up their ego. That's all, just yourself. And I just, and when I did change, I've never, the real bad words I've never said again. Because I give Him all the glory and all the praise for it. But being in Korea did make a pretty good man out of me.
So I just need to thank you for doing this interview with me, and thank you for your service in this country.
Well, I have enjoyed it. It brought back a lot of memories.
Shake your hand.
Okay, buddy.
This is some bonus footage, and I'm going to stand here and let my granddad show me some medals that he received.
Okay. I don't know what all... This plaque was given to me by my nephew. He's a major in the Army, and he had it made up for me. This piece of barbed wire is it's called the demilitarized zone, 38th parallel. It's in the center of Korea, all the way across it. That's the original piece of wire from it. These medals, these you wore on your uniform. This is a combat engineer badge. I don't know what all these medals are. That's 3rd Army, 19th Combat Group, 185th Combat Engineers. This, I shot expert with a rifle. There's a medal for expert, good conduct medal, medal from the President Sigmarie of Korea with 3 bronze battle stars. The battle stars represents each star is a major battle, like Hartberg Ridge, Punch Bowl, and so forth. I've got a good conduct medal. I didn't have a medal for track for running, but many times I wanted to do it. And that's about it. This is a Korean Presidential Medal. Sergeant, a corporal. I made corporal. I couldn't get any higher in rank because my MOS didn't call for it. But I'll tell you a little story. When I was over there, they cut out all buck sergeants and went from staff sergeant to corporal. So I couldn't make buck sergeant. They cut it out. This was the same as a buck sergeant. But just as soon as I got off the ship in San Francisco, they brought the buck sergeant back in. I guess it's because I was getting off. But that's the story behind that. And I don't know what this medal's for. It's got to do with something. He took my records and made this plaque. And I'm very proud of it. Thank you.